Disney Plus brings together fans of all ages. This podcast brings three adults who are also kids at heart together to talk about Disney Plus. Join Scott, the Magic Genie producer, Regina, the sassy Megara of the group, and Nathan, the gentle but grumpy Brit, as they bring you news, reviews, special guests, and discussions on the Disney Plus Streamcast.
Hi, and welcome to today's episode of the Disney Plus Streamcast. I'm Scott Murray, and I'm here with Regina Davis.
Hello, hello.
Well, I am beginning to get some feedback from listeners who are ready for us to talk about Season 3 of Clone Wars. So that is on the docket for June. But my understanding is, from what you've told us off mic, is you're way beyond that. Have you finished the series? Because I think the last time I talked to you, you were already evolving into that last season.
Yes. As of day before yesterday, I have finished it. And oh my God. See, I'm about to have like an emotional breakdown right now just talking about it. I cannot wait to talk about this with you guys. It is amazing because we all had pretty fond reviews of season 2. Mm-hmm. There was a couple shaky things here and there, but coming off of the shakiness of season 1,
right? I
think it made plenty of improvements. Well, it just exceeds expectations season to season from then on. Nice. And then season 6 and 7 are just. And I promise you I'm not just being dramatic because I just finished it. Mm-hmm. But season 6 and 7 may be some of my favorite Star Wars content.
Nice.
Yeah.
I don't think you're alone in that.
Oh, man. It's really, really magical. Like, it's amazing.
I will tell you that finally, I mentioned, I think one of the last times we talked about Ahsoka, I went through the whole story of how I was a big fan of hers long before she became what she is now, and that I had a T-shirt that I made on Zazzle with her on it, and I wore it so much it just got disgusting, and I had to burn it or throw it out or something. And I haven't replaced it since. Well, I can report now that a couple weeks ago I officially replaced it. I have a new Ahsoka shirt.
Oh,
now.
Thank goodness. Oh, because, buddy, you're going to need it. Because if you love her now, you're going to love her times a million later on. Her arc is just breathtaking.
Yeah.
I can't wait for us to talk about all this. But yeah, season 3, I'm hyped.
Well, that will happen in June because I know listeners and, honestly, myself and I think Nathan, we're definitely anxious to be where everybody else is at.
Yeah,
and
I'm
be
sorry,
part of that
guys.
experience.
I just couldn't stop.
No, it's okay.
I couldn't.
I mean, the show is to talk about things. We're not here to go, Regina, you can't watch this until then. Because you've already said that you will happily just go through 3 again, just to go through it again.
Yes.
Yeah, Perfect. Well, speaking of Nathan, we have to discuss news before we get to our main topic today. So what time is it, Regina?
That means it's time for News with Nathan.
Hello, everybody. Disappointed week, guys. Disappointing. I have to offer up an apology. Scott, you know a little bit about this because you're the head honcho in charge. Guys, I've let you all down. I was betrayed, bamboozled, bilked, even. Such chicanery heretofore unseen in the production of this podcast, and just because I thought I was doing someone a solid. So listen up, and I'll give you my mea culpa. Before we went to air last week, my roomie, God bless her, sent me a news story text and said, "Oh, will you please include this for me? I always listen to your podcast every week, mate, and it put such a smile on my face to know that I got to contribute in some small way. And throw her a bone. That's absolutely fine." The news story, which in retrospect does sound a little bit sketchy when you read it out loud, renaming Ben Nevis Mountain in Scotland to Kenobi in honor of Ewan McGregor. Guys, it was a hoax. It was a ruse. It was a scam. It was a con. And because it was my roomie, I didn't do my due diligence, and I frankly fell for her flim flam. And I apologize to all those who listened in confidence. I did get her back. I did. And keeping it on topic, I was going through all my self help books because, I'm a Renaissance man. I keep up with that sort of thing. And I did find, was it a book or was it a dusty old holocron? I'll never tell. It was called Choke That Fool: How to Successfully Resolve Interpersonal Conflicts at Home and at Work, Harnessing the Power of the Dark Side by D. Vader. Anyway, I went through the chapters, and I think I learned well, and I settled on an appropriate punishment, which was it's called the Tuscan Sandbag, the Tuscan Satchel, where you go ahead and take a whole bunch of sand, and you just go and dump it in their undie drawer. Sand, much like her, as we all know, is coarse, rough, and irritating. And you know what? She's going to find that out firsthand, and I hope that lesson serves her well. So my apologies. And after all that, I was stressed, and so I needed to relax. And what a better way to relax than to watch some Zenimation, which launched last week on Disney+. Did you guys happen to see any of that?
Not yet, no.
It's 10 episodes, each about 7 to 9 minutes, containing scenes from all your favorite Disney movies, but the soundtracks have been replaced with a simulation of the ambient noise you'd hear in real life. So the water one, for example, it has a bit from Moana where everyone's out on the boats rowing, and you don't hear like the soundtrack, the music, or any of the voices. What you do hear is like the scything of the boat through the water, the swishing of the oars through the foam. You hear the waves break and all that stuff. It's really, really quite soothing. Only criticism is it's really not long enough. If it was like one of those things you could just loop on, when they have like the fireplace or the aquarium mode for your TV, I would absolutely adore it. But if you need a little bit of R&R and you love your Disney, as I'm sure you do, you could do worse than check that out. Other things that you could check out, but this one you probably shouldn't. The Big Fib also premiered last week, which is a kid game show, red flag right there, hosted by Yvette Nicole Brown, and we love her. And Rhys Darby is on it as well, and Rhys Darby is just one of the best in everything he does. Yeah, he sucks in this. He sucks really bad in this because it's aimed at children and it's really, really unfunny. But if you've got a 9-year-old niece or nephew, they're gonna just pee their pants watching it, I can assure you. But my advice to you is don't waste your time. The other thing that was notable that launched this week was Out, which is a Spark short from Pixar. I did go ahead and watch that one, and oh my god, you guys, it's absolutely brilliant. I absolutely adored it. I loved it. I cried, all that stuff. And if that makes me a snowflake, come at me, I'll fight you. It was brilliant. It was so good. And if you haven't watched any of those Spark shorts, start with that one, because it really was outrageously fantastic. Something else that we're all excited for, and it's not Disney Plus right now, but who knows in the future. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., one of our favorites, comes back on May 27th for its last season.
You sure about that?
Is it not? It's in Variety this week.
No. Are you sure it's one of our favorites?
Sure, it's our favorites. We love Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., don't we?
After about a third into season 1, I was out.
What?
But Coulson and
I know I like
Daisy.
Coulson. Mm-hmm. Well, I like Coulson.
I mean, I've watched shows for less. I'm looking at you, the rookie, right? You hear me, Regina? Right?
Right. I mean,
but really? All right, well, 2/3 of us love it then, Scott. A majority rules. I mean,
granted, there's some things that I have to turn a blind eye to, but I turn my head happily.
Okay.
Interesting.
Wow.
Weird.
Well, anyway, for the sake of Scott, I guess, who is the only probably Marvel fan who doesn't like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., he did talk about a couple of guest directors they're not going to talk about. Sounds like they're coming from the cast. Look forward to those episodes. Certainly Clark Gregg. Hang on, did I even talk about that? Clark Gregg, he was interviewed in Variety this week about all this because the PR thing is going overdrive for this new season. So Clark Gregg was talking about the crossover with Agent Carter because Amber Gokaj is in it as Agent Sousa, so that's brilliant. Mm-hmm. They talk about the couple of guest shots from new directors, so that's great too. A couple of cool quotes I'll read out. They asked him if he had any kind of any feelings about Marvel TV coming to an end and then Marvel Studios doing all these new shows for Disney Plus and on a huge scale. And does he ever look at that and wonder what might have been? And he said that, I feel like ABC did a great job in trying to adapt to us as we tried to adapt to them, but I'd be lying if I didn't say, boy, that would be really interesting to start the experiment over, doing 10 episodes or 12 episodes the way Tom Hiddleston told me he was doing on Loki, with that kind of budget and that Marvel Cinematic production team. So yeah, I mean, I'd reboot all of it to get it on, Disney Plus with the Marvel Studios team for sure. And they asked him, do you think he'll ever play Coulson again? And he said, it's hard for me to imagine a scenario where I'd say, no, I'm too busy to put on whatever the latest version of the suit is and go and play Phil Coulson.
Aw,
Never say
good.
never. Yeah. So, that was nice.
Yeah.
For us, in other news, shows that are coming, I saw there was a release date for Muppets Now. Was it July
Yes.
31st?
Mhm.
So great for Scott and the 12 people who like the Muppets now. I like the Muppets too, but I'm just going to be edgy about this all episode now, Scott. Man, Coulson, man.
Hey, I don't have anything against Coulson. I actually interviewed him about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And granted, I had to read up on it. But,
Oh my
but
God. I hope he's not listening. I mean, good Lord. I'm just going to have to unbox my Hot Toys Agent Coulson now and just cuddle that at bed tonight. Ranchero the teddy bear is going to have to get kicked off to the side, and I'm just going to have to cuddle my Coulson because you just hurt my heart, sir.
I have, to my right, I have my photo op with Clark Gregg, which is right next to a Funko Pop of Agent Coulson.
Yeah, it's too bad you hate him.
No, I like him. I'm just not a fan of the show. I like the movies he was in as Coulson.
5 minutes here and there. I mean, okay, it's fine. Anyway, Disney Springs reopened this week, and there was some footage about that doing the rounds. Looks like it was pretty well attended, despite all the social distancing and the mandatory masking. People seem to be having fun. Lots of families, grad parties. A lot of it was still closed, but on the whole, looks like people were really getting into the spirit and trying to enjoy their downtime as it is in the presence of the House of Mouse. Something that I thought was real neat was the Starbucks on site made a new drink for the reopening called the Welcome Back. It looks a bit like Princess Aurora. It's all like bright pink. It's made with blended dragon fruit refresher, coconut milk, strawberries, blueberries, pineapple ginger syrup, and then they top that with a golden ginger whipped cream. It looks really great. I don't normally go to Starbucks. I'm a coffee snob and I do it all at home, but I would totally have one of those on a hot day. Nat Geo this week talked about some of the stuff they have going on. They have their Genius, the Aretha Franklin series that they had that was coming out, supposed to come out now. It's been pushed back to the fall. You can also expect their new shows from Bear Grylls and Gordon Ramsay and Bobby Bones, who I guess he's a mentor on American Idol. He looks like Ryan Seacrest with the glasses. Like he's a bit Weezer, I think is the quote, but he's really, really country. He's the top rated country DJ in the country, if that sounds redundant. Like he knows country music inside out. He's been like in Austin and Nashville, and now he's syndicated and people love him, and he's getting a show. So watch out for that, because invariably all that stuff is going to come to Disney Plus as well. Abigail Disney starting on executive bonuses for Disney recently in the wake of all these cast members who've been furloughed, many of which haven't been able to get unemployment yet in the state of Florida. There's a story in that in this week's Guardian, quite interesting. Brad Lund, who is a grandson of Disney, also said the same thing, and he said the family's kind of livid about that. And if you're into kind of angry tweets, you can check all that out on Twitter. And finally, and this bit was absolutely baffling to me. It's not baffling to Scott, because when he's not hating on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., he's doing the Renegade, he's doing the Say So dance, he's doing all these things on TikTok, being, an avid user of social media and new platforms. I guess the head of streaming for Disney, Kevin Mayer, he's been poached, and he's left Disney. He's left Disney to go to TikTok, which the last thing I saw about TikTok was that it's 30-second clips of people dancing and jumping out of cars and being kind of generally like obnoxious to their parents. I guess the money's good. I don't know what else to say about that. But certainly, when the stock market heard that, Disney stock dropped 1% on the day, like trading. That's mental to me. They did go ahead and talk about some new leadership that they've announced in the wake of that. Josh D'Amaro, who you might have seen doing various videos for the Disney Magic Moments over the last month. He was the president of Walt Disney World Resort, and now he's the chairman of Parks, Experiences, and Consumer Products, which is what Bob Chapek was before he got promoted up to CEO. Parks, Experiences, and Consumer Products, that's so incredibly vague for something that's so incredibly broad. That's like 6 parks around the world, a cruise line, every bit of Disney consumer merchandise at home, plush, toys, whatever it is. It's all of it. It's if you can touch it, if you can feel it, if you can buy it, that's his purview now. So that's a good old promotion for him. And Rebecca Campbell, who's also been with Disney for 23 years, has been promoted up to the chairman of their direct-to-consumer and international streaming division. Again, big promotion for her. Haven't seen how the stock has rebounded, but Disney, on the day that all that was announced, was up 7% in trading. And that's the news I have.
That is strange. Strange news.
And like I say, the money must be good.
It must be great.
For now. You never know when a social media channel suddenly begins to phase out depending on who's not using it anymore.
Like, which one of these things is a safer bet?
Yeah.
Yeah, when everyone's back to work, I think it might be a slightly different story in terms of take up on TikTok. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm actually looking forward to, been looking forward to our discussion today. We went back and watched a movie from the 90s, and I'll be interested to hear what everybody else thought of the film when they saw it for the first time, and what they thought of the rewatch, because I don't even think I've ever asked you guys about today's topic. So, looking forward to getting into that discussion.
That's next on the Disney Plus Streamcast.
So George of the Jungle just recently became available on Disney Plus. I know this because I've been a fan of the movie since seeing it back in 1997, and I remember in the early days of Disney Plus going to it, and it was there. I wanted to watch it, but there was like a 2-minute clip on it and said, no, this is not coming until May, which was disappointing. They had the second one, which I've not seen. So finally, it was nice to sit down and watch it again for the show this week. And that is our main topic this week, is George of the Jungle from 1997. And as we get into this, the first thing, now granted, I don't know if either one of you liked it. I guess we're going to get into that. But whether or not you liked it, personally, one thing I will say about it is just conceptually, there are so many reasons why this thing should be awful. Because it's an adaptation of a cartoon trying to bring it to real life, and that's so dicey, especially when it's not something just overly deep, and yet you're going to try to create this full-blown story out of it. You know, I remember the old cartoons and Watch Out for That Tree and all that. When I found out they were making a live-action version, I thought, oh, no. Conceptually, as far as how they went about pulling it off, I mean, before we get into all the details, I mean, I think it's not a bad shot at taking something that was just a little cartoon and turning it into a live action. I mean, what did you all think about just the adaptation of this?
I think it's actually really impressive what they did, because while it is live action, it does still digest like a cartoon. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, I mean, there's still a lot of really, really wacky stuff going on, but none of it is cartoony to the level where it feels disjointed or it takes you out of, the current scene. Mm-hmm. So I think they did something really impressive here, because it's just as cartoony as the actual cartoon while still being, I'd say, 95% live action.
George of the Jungle. You know, it's hard for me to talk about merit, having just sat through it. The nicest thing I can say about it in regards of merit is that it was made on a budget of $55 million, and somebody loved it enough to go see it a whole bunch because it did 174 million at the box office. That's making 92 minutes of Brendan Fraser running around making goofy faces and stuff. And yeah, I didn't know the cartoon. We didn't have it in England, or if we did, it was off my radar. Yikes! Yeah, I was speechless for the first 20 minutes or so watching that movie. And again, it wasn't through any technical merit. Some of it was shock because John Cleese is in it. Some of it was because I heard presidents of the United States of America doing the theme song, which much like, you know, like when you go through your CDs, like back in the day, you're clearing out a closet and you go through your stuff and like maybe you find something that's good. Like, oh look, this is from when I graduated. Not me, because we didn't do that in England, but you might. But then also there's that thing that you do when you go through it and like you find a Limp Bizkit CD and you're like, oh Christ, I was into them, wasn't I? And you throw it away and straight away and you're like, ugh, move on. And that's kind of the vibe I got with my rewatch of George of the Jungle and kind of how I felt once I got past the credits with the seizure-inducing opening titles, I should say. Like I knew I was in for a bumpy ride, and yeah, I wasn't wrong.
So that was Nathan's long answer of basically saying he didn't watch the cartoon, so there was really no comparison as to conceptualize whether or not this was a good adaptation.
Got it in one, Scott.
I saw this for the first time, like I said, in 1997. I remember I took my cousin at the time, who was a lot younger, not much older than what my niece is now. So it was really just, you know, my little cousin's in town, take her to see a kid's movie. And so I remember going into that, I thought, because of the adaptation thing, I remember thinking, you know, this is, you know, hopefully I can get through this. And I actually laughed all the way through it. But it's very much my sense of humor. You know, I'm not saying that I couldn't see why it wouldn't connect with other people, but you know, I love when they break the fourth wall in this, especially the narrator. I think the narrator is probably one of my favorite parts of the whole thing. I also like, you know, Lyle falling in the crap, and then the guys take a moment to point out this is a time where we throw our heads back and laugh. I mean, that's totally my type of humor, and I think it's because it's not the typical thing that happens in a movie. And I found myself, you know, maybe not laughing through it the way I did the first time I saw it, but I think there were some moments that I found myself laughing again, some things that I forgot about. Nathan was just talking about John Cleese. I love John Cleese. It is a little bit of a weird disconnect. I mean, I like what he does, but it was an interesting choice, kind of out of the blue. I guess they thought, you know, it would be so off the wall, it would fit everything else from what they were doing.
I think he must have been broke.
But I think
the paycheck.
Stop.
I think Fraser was inspired casting for it, though. I think he's perfect for what the movie is trying to do. And, you know, Leslie Mann's playing very typical Leslie Mann type characters. Thomas Hayden Church, in a lot of ways, is playing a very Thomas Hayden Church type character. There's a lot of other characters in this. You know, Richard Roundtree is in it. You have the guy from Parker Lewis Can't Lose. He's in it doing one of his typical characters.
Abraham Ben Ruby.
Yes. So I mean, I like the casting a lot in it. I think everybody fits what they're trying to do. I think this is one of those movies where it's a fine line between how much kids are going to get out of it, how much adults are going to get out of it. Because, you know, as a kid, you're not going to question John Cleese or anything like that. You're not going to overanalyze it. But I think knowing the cartoon and having the sense of humor that I have, it works for me, but I can see why it wouldn't work for somebody else. Regina, what about you? When was the first time you saw this, or was this the first time you saw this, and what did you come away with? So
this is the third time I saw this. The first time I was probably about six or seven. And it was just loud enough, just noisy enough, and just wonky enough to keep my attention. It didn't really mean a lot to me at a young age because I think animated things were much more my deal back then. Then I saw it again during my preteen years, and I realized that I love George of the Jungle because he's very attractive. And during my rewatch, I realized that it's definitely not as funny as I remember, but 28-year-old Regina is still willing to forgive quite a bit for Brendan Fraser's abs in this movie because, you know, I'm willing to give him a lot of rope comedy-wise for the work he put into that bod. Otherwise, not a lot of actual audible laughter came out of me. Not a lot of the nose puffy air kind either. I chuckled a little bit like when the like animatronic lion squinted before he hit the tree. That kind of made me laugh. I think honestly the biggest laugh it got out of me was when the monkey farted. But other than that, it was just, I'm glad this movie doesn't take itself any more seriously than it does. Because it pokes a lot of fun at itself and is pretty self-aware. And if it wasn't, it would be an utter disaster. But instead, it's a fun watch for kids. It's certainly no piece of art, though.
Oh, you don't want me to say anything, do you? I mean,
give it to us, Nathan.
I mean, let's give this context and remind people you're willing to consider a bunch of silly teenagers actual agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And you're going to talk to us about context for George of the Jungle.
I just so here's the deal. I thought I had seen that movie, and I realized pretty quickly into it that I hadn't, which is odd because, you know, there's not too many loincloth wearing, vine swinging live action movies about that would kind of you confuse that with. Yeah, you know, maybe if I'd had the cartoon as like a frame of reference, there are some things that I guess just don't translate if you don't have that reference, and I feel like this is probably one of them. I think, oh gosh, what's the other cartoon you guys have that I think absolutely sucks? But if I say it around like Americans, they go like, "Oh my gosh!" With Natasha and Boris, and is it Rocky and Bullwinkle?
Oh, Rocky and
is that
Bullwinkle.
The one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. See, there's some bits of Americana which they, you know, they just don't kind of translate the same way.
Isn't Dudley Do Right part of that show too?
I don't know, but Fraser played him in a movie as well.
That's what I'm
right?
saying.
Like, I'm not saying the man's typecast, but he did a good thing getting into those mummy movies pretty quickly, I think. My dudes, you know, I love you guys. You guys are like really cool, and we've had some ups and we've had some downs, but a lot of laughs along the way. But this movie for me was completely irredeemable. People say that May was long. You know, oh, May in Quarantine was long. This was 92 minutes. I felt every tick on the second hand of that clock. I just was like, oh my word. And that's the thing. In that, like, when that movie came out, I guess 97, there's bits that I think like it apes, pardon the pun, quite well. In that, you know, when they get back to San Francisco, Betsy, is it Ursula's best friend, she's looking all friends. You know, she's got the Aniston haircut or whatever else. And whenever you see all the dude bros at the engagement party and they're all wearing the deconstructed Armani blazer or jacket and all the rest of it, like, yeah, I mean, you know, there's bits I think, yeah, that's well observed, and that's what it's like, and that's what you saw on TV. And that, I think, is it's a little funny of itself, even a little wry maybe. But the rest of it, oh my God, like, I just, you know, it wasn't sufficiently goofy that I was gonna like start slapping my thighs and chuckling, and I don't think it was especially smart the way it was written. Like, the Lyle comes back at the end, and oh, but wait, he's now a minister, and wait, he's got mercenaries, and it's like, you just drew that out, didn't you? And the narrator didn't really make things any better for me because I kind of hate him. I really do hate him. And Richard Roundtree, that man was Shaft, one of the first great African American action heroes. That leather jacket, you know, keeping his pimp hand strong. He was awesome, and now he's just kind of some, you know, caricature of an African tour guide. And yeah, I was dismayed throughout that. But I tell you what, the bright spot for me, and yeah, bright spot, fair enough, Leslie Mann. She's Leslie Mann in every movie, kind of, but she's adorable, so you don't mind. Yeah. So in much the same way that I was chuckling and smirking, like whenever Regina was like going, "Oh yeah, but Brendan Fraser and that body," and I'm like, "Oh, grow up, Regina." And the whole time I'm there, kind of like preening over Leslie Mann. And then I am the hypocrite, and I do admit that.
Some things save it.
She's in that, and if you like it, if you like her, then you will like this because she's winsome and adorable in everything she's ever in.
I'm not sure there's really any cartoon context that helps or hurts the situation. The only thing really that most people remember about George the Jungle is the song and the fact that he ran into trees.
That's part of the problem with the movie, is that it's just the same joke over and over and over.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if it's a problem because I don't think they overdo it. They kind of pick their spots with it. You can't have him. You can't have him swing on a vine and do it perfectly at any point. But you still got to have him swing on the vines. You know, if he swings on the vine perfectly, then you've almost kind of killed what he really is, right?
He does it a couple times.
But if that's the mechanic you need to kind of get from A to B, like joke-wise, plot beat-wise, and it's him going face-first pancake into a tree, watch out for that tree, George. Like, I think you can have a debate there as to how funny it is. To me, like I said, there are other things that I find funny in the movie. A lot of it comes from the whole not taking itself too seriously, breaking the fourth wall. And like I said, I like the things the narrator did. I like it when the narrator's arguing with the villains and things like that. I feel like I understand why they did that stuff. I mean, I just think everything about this, like Regina said, doesn't take itself too seriously. They did turn it into kind of a Tarzan story of sorts, only with these, you know, whacked out humor bits. I mean, I understand why some people may not like it, but I mean, I also think you got to be real careful about how far you dig as it relates to story and characters and who's in it, when it would be like overanalyzing Ernest Goes to Camp. I mean, you got to just, I mean, it's a movie about a guy who was raised by animals and runs into trees. I mean, you kind of know it's not going to be deep when you get into it. So, I mean, I always think sometimes when people overanalyze things, it's, you know, you get into, you know, well, that's like going to see Superman and having a hardcore discussion on whether, you know, how realistic it was because the dude flew. Well, I think, though, like, looking at the Avengers, there's all sorts of discussions about that online, right? Like, Endgame, like, well, if Captain Marvel's so great, why didn't you just come down beforehand and just, like, save everyone before? Why we had to do the snap anyway? Like, that's just kind of crazy and plot holes and things. But if a movie's good, you overlook it. If the writing's tight, you think, oh, well, just whatever. You know, like, when something's not right in, like, the original Star Wars trilogy, everyone's just like, yeah, space magic, don't worry about it. But whenever you talk about that in the prequels or the post-quels, I don't know if that's what they're called,
sequels.
But that's what other sequels. But the other sequels, the new sequels.
The sequel trilogy.
Anyway, those movies, because they suck, people keep on talking about the ways in which they suck, and space magic isn't enough to kind of save it. Like, everything gets broken down. And I'm not saying that I expected a tour de force from the man who would eventually go on to make the David Spade vehicle Dickie Roberts' former child star. I wouldn't expect that. But I know this movie is beloved by Americans. I know a lot of people really, really love it. When you say George the Jungle, people do sing that damn song. When I said I had to do that for my podcast this week,
now where is
people
that coming from? Because the people you were talking to, or it's clearly not coming from the 57% of people who didn't like it on or liked it on Rotten Tomatoes.
I think it's a nostalgia thing.
That's like a 50-50 split.
I think it's like a nostalgia thing. People are like, oh yeah, yeah, George of the Jungle, like, oh my gosh, like the same way. All right, another Brendan Fraser movie I do remember really, really well, Encino Man, California Man in England, if you're paying attention over there. That movie objectively is a terrible movie, but it's a fun movie, and I remember, like, Dude, Where's My Car is not a Brendan Fraser movie, and is a terrible movie, but is a movie that, again, they'll quote those phrases ad infinitum back and forth to each other because it's like such a dude movie, even though it sucks. Like there is a nostalgia about some of that stuff, and there is, I guess, just whether it captured the zeitgeist at the time. Much like if you go back and watch Friends, it doesn't hold up like Frasier ever did, but at the same time, people remember, I'll be there for you. And it's like, oh yeah, it's like Joey and Chandler and like all that. And, people they love that 90s thing. And, there's bits that I do see with that where people get into that, where it's like, yeah, all right, you weren't born yet, Regina, but one day you'll look back and say, oh yeah, look, retro, that's really cool. The bit where Brendan Fraser like puts on his like Nikes, for example, I was like, oh my God, I've seen those ugly shoes in real life. And I didn't mind the product placement. Again, the nostalgia, I guess it just gets you in a certain way and makes something a bit more beloved than it really is.
Well, but you brought up the 90s, which, by the way, I never got into Friends in the 90s. I still can't get into Friends, even in its resurgence. But again, that's the difference between people's sense of humor. I do think there's something to be said for a 90s movie, though. And you kind of alluded to some of this. I think one of the things that can impact it, whether it's watching it for the first time in 2020 or watching it for the first time in a long time, I have noticed, this kind of goes back to some of the other things I think we've discussed when we've gone back and watched some movies from the past. People don't write and produce and edit things the same way anymore. And I think one of the things that I find is definitely true from older movies especially, and it's funny because I don't think you really recognize what your brain's gotten used to until you sometimes go back and look at an old movie and realize that the pacing feels slow, unlike when you first watched it, because your brain was programmed to, you'd kind of gotten used to how movies were paced then, and they're not paced the same way anymore. I remember just the other day, I couldn't wait to sit down and watch Clue again for the first time, and I was one of those people that went and saw that movie 2 or 3 times in the movie theater because I wanted to see the different endings, and always remembered it to be hilarious, and it is. I mean, it's got an all-star cast, and Tim Curry's awesome in everything he does. But I found myself like getting antsy, and I didn't feel that way before. But then I stopped and thought, well, geez, look when this movie was made. And there were times, even a little bit, even in George of the Jungle, I felt myself getting that way. But I think part of that, again, is I think there's just that weird kind of subconscious underlying programming we get when we watch X amount of movies, contemporary movies that just aren't done the way they were done years ago. And I think there is something to be said for that. I don't think it's just related to whether or not it's a kid's movie. I also think there are just differences in the way things are done. And sometimes that's a good thing and sometimes that's a bad thing, because I do think there's some quote-unquote humor today that's just dreadful, and I find it in a lot of modern contemporary comedy writing. But when it comes to editing and pacing, I have noticed that when I've gone back and even watched some things that I loved when they first came out, that I'm getting antsy. And I think it's just because there are pacing differences between how things are cut and moving today than they did, in this case, 23 years ago.
I get that, but then when I think about some of my favorite movies from the 90s, and whether you talk about something that's a little bit more art house comedy like Clerks, whether you look at something like Clueless, which I adored and I still think kind of holds up now, something which probably shouldn't hold up but gets a guilty laugh from me every time I watch it, Happy Bloody Gilmore.
Oh, yeah.
And even Dumb and Dumber. They're all movies that are done in the 90s, and they kind of hold up. And those last two are goofy as all get out, especially Dumb and Dumber. That movie from start to finish. I mean, Carrie, everything in the 90s was like just over the top. But it works, and I still think it's enjoyable now. Whereas this one, I was kind of just hard-pressed. So I don't know. I do think, though, that something like, especially if it does have some real deep roots, I feel like you're more likely to give it an easier time of things.
Well, I also think that, I mean, you were pointing out before, there's music that you were listening to back then that you can't stand now. I mean, I think it's the same principle. It's not to say that everything's universally, have that problem. But there's just things that still work for you and for some reasons, and things that don't. And it could be any number of things. It could be that the way you're programmed to listen to music is different. Even though you might still want to hear something that sounds very 80s, you just don't want to hear that 80s. So I mean, I don't think it necessarily means that all movies were paced in a way that don't work anymore. I mean, I think you could nitpick any number of things from past movies as to why they didn't work or work, but I do think that there are some things that come down to style. It's the reason why when you get older, or so many people get older, they end up talking about, like I just did, that they don't write humor the way they used to, which is extremely true. But when I was growing up, that people my age then were saying the same thing. They didn't think it was funny. It's like late night TV now. I would much rather watch reruns of Johnny Carson than anything that's on late night tonight. I'm just saying that's an observation for me. There's obviously, I mean, I can still watch Goonies without any problem, but I watched Clue the other day, and I was just like, oh boy, something needs to start speeding up here.
No, I feel you. I tried to get someone to watch Blade Runner the other day, and Blade Runner is arguably one of the best movies of all time, arguably, by film critics who say that. And I love it. And I went to watch it, and I'm like, God, I don't remember it being that slow. So I totally, still looks amazing, but it is a slow burner.
Very slow.
Yeah, and so, yeah, I get what you're saying there, mate. Can we just say, though, that under no circumstances, when you say taste, that even lets Limp Bizkit off the hook for just a second. That CD there in my closet that I found, I was quite happy to throw it away. And we just don't want to say there's anything redeemable about that at all. We were there for it. We acknowledge it happened.
Never owned it.
Let's just pretend that it we've all forgotten about it, and we'll just move on.
I remember watching this again, like I said, last night. There were things I laughed at that I laughed at the first time. There were things that I could totally see why someone would not like or would even find cringeworthy. And really, my final takeaway from watching it again, if I was talking to somebody who'd never seen it, especially if they had kids, if you have kids and you want something to watch with your kids, you're not going to go wrong with it. I mean, there's silly humor in it, but everybody's charming in it, I think. I think it's well casted. I mean, I think the characters are good. It's cute. It's fun, I think. I'll just say. But it's not going to win any awards. But I don't think it was designed to win any awards. So that's how I will leave it. It wasn't the exact same experience as when I saw it in 97, but I still am glad I watched it again. That's where I will leave it. And you two, however you want to leave it.
I'd say that if you've got kids, go for it. I don't necessarily encourage revisiting it for nostalgia reasons, just because it wasn't entirely worth it for me, as attractive as I found Brendan Fraser. And Leslie Mann is just a little bit too bubbly to be my type, so she didn't really help. It's a little bit much for me, but it is cute at times.
You know what, Scott? I'm going to revise my opinion based on what you said. As you know, we've had this chat. I love it whenever people kind of have that relationship with something and they have that emotional connection. And the fact that it meant a little bit to you back then, and you had that family moment, and it put a smile on your face this time round. I love that. Like Regina said, it's a bit goofy. Like you said, it's not for everyone. But yeah, if you've got kids, you should probably watch it and don't listen to me.
Well, it's possible someone could listen to you go, oh yeah, I hate it when movies do what that guy's talking about. I'm not watching that.
just enjoy your stay at home and watch the damn movie, guys.
Okay. Well, I guess that's a really good place to wrap things up today. Thank you all for your opinions about George of the Jungle, and thank you for joining us for today's discussion. This was a lot of fun, and we plan on having a lot of fun next week. Going to do something a little different next week. We are going to discuss a movie that we're going to watch on Disney+, but it's going to be different for all three of us, because we're going to watch something that our friends, maybe family or colleagues, have said, oh my gosh, I can't believe you haven't watched that. So we're going to watch whatever that is, and it'll be different for all three of us. In fact, the one that I'm going to watch, I think I mentioned on a previous show, a movie that was on Disney Plus that everybody was shocked that I haven't seen, especially knowing my passion for things like Star Wars and fantasy movies and things like that. If you don't remember what that was, I will reveal it again next week because I would have finally watched it. So that's what we're going to do on next week's show. In the meantime, remember we are online on Twitter at Disney Plus Cast and on our website, DisneyPlusStreamcast.com. We have all the episodes there, as well as the links to several of the places you can find the show. You can also reach out to us if you'd like to do that for any reason. Thank you so much for listening to the show today, and we hope you'll be back next week for another episode of the Disney Plus Streamcast.